a lot of the doctors attribute these experiences, near-death experiences, to anoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. But it's been studied, and a lot of people that have these experiences have no, lack of oxygen. And how to, and if people like test pilots that have episodes like hallucinatory episodes because of a lack of oxygen while they're in these supersonic planes, it's anything but clear and lucid. I mean, it's jumbled, and they don't even know what's going on.
Hello, everyone. This is Diane Gilman, and the podcast is Too Young to Be Old, although many of you will know me as the Jean Queen from HSN. Today, we have the most fascinating of subjects, probably the one inevitability that none of us have ever been able to discover 100%, which is there consciousness after death? And we have, and it is my privilege to have Robert Ginsberg on air. If you watched, or if you're considering it, do the Netflix miniseries Surviving Death. Robert Ginsberg is episode 4. He has spent 2 decades researching, backing up information, going to the medical community, going to the scientific community to prove there is consciousness and a continuum of thought after death. Robert, I could not be more respectful, more grateful, because I think if we had 1,000 people listening to this, and I said to you, how many of you have lost someone you loved? At least 999 would raise their hands. And if I asked, would you like to talk to them again? Would you like to know they're okay? 999 of you would raise your hands. Here is the man who actually has devoted the last 2 decades to proof that that is true. Robert, thank you so much. Will you tell us your story and how you began your journey?
Yeah, if we go back to 2001, and we wouldn't be having this conversation because I was an open-minded skeptic, but a skeptic none the least when it comes to the concept of life after death. I was a logical left brain thinker, and I said, what could possibly survive? We are our bodies, we are our brains. Our brains are no more, our bodies are no more, so that's it. The finality of death is what made sense to me. And then on the morning of September 1st, 2002, my wife woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and she sat up in bed, and she was trembling and shaking and ashen white. She couldn't even speak. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she would just stare at me. And she still wouldn't talk. I said, I just grabbed her. I said, "What's the matter? Tell me." And she just looked at me and said, "Something horrible is going to happen today." And I said, "Well, what does that mean? Can you tell me any more?" And she said, "All I can tell you is that our lives are going to be changed forever today." So even though I didn't so-called believe in this stuff, like, visions of precognition or anything like that, I took it seriously because we were married at that point, for a very long time. And my wife, Fran, had many experiences where she had similar, precognitive visions, and they all turned out to play out exactly the way she said, but they were all good things. So I said, well, if she was right then, she could be right now. So to make a long story short, I watched over my 3 children throughout the day. I let my guard down at night. Um, I let it fade from my awareness, and then we were in a restaurant, and we had 2 cars, and I let my son and my daughter drive home in one car, and Fran and I followed. And, we came upon a horrific accident. My daughter didn't survive her injuries, and my son had very serious injuries and was airlifted to a local hospital. So after not even knowing at that point whether I was going to lose two children, I was in shock, as you might uh, anticipate. And then suddenly it dawned on me. I remembered that morning, wait a second, how did Fran know? She knew, I mean, so I became obsessed with finding out if there were credible people. I'm talking about people with advanced degrees and medical degrees that had any evidence that my daughter could still be alive in some form. Did she survive, and where was she, and is she okay? I mean, those are things that most people want to know about their deceased loved ones.
Yeah.
And when I started, I started traveling across the country, meeting with all these people, mostly scientists that studied consciousness, and the evidence that I was learning about was incredible to me. And I'm like, why doesn't everybody know about this? And
So,
that it, yeah,
what
I'm
kind
saying,
of evidence? Could you give us some examples? I'm
yeah.
just
Well,
fascinated.
yeah, for instance, I mean, I started with investigating near-death experiences. So in a near-death experience, what happens is that a person meets every single definition that medical science has for death. They have no brain waves, they have no heartbeat, they have no respiration. Their EEG is flat, they have no reflexes. Medical science and doctors say they're dead. And yet, with the resuscitative techniques that we have today, some of these people are brought back to life. And when they come back to life, they talk about experiences they had when they were, let's call it, on the other side. Sometimes not everybody has the same experience, but some people talk about going through a tunnel, reaching a light. Some people talk about elevating above their bodies and can tell you everything that went on. People report clear and lucid thinking. If you have no brain waves, how do you have clear and lucid thinking? That made no sense to me. They describe it as being realer than real. They describe seeing loved ones that had died, before them. And there are multitudes of commonalities with these things. So that got me on the track, and that I thought that was tremendous, evidence that we're not our brains, we're more than our physical bodies, and that at death, our minds or our consciousness or our soul, whatever you prefer to call it, goes beyond the body, and still goes on. It's just, in a different form.
So, when your daughter died and it was so traumatic for your family, did you start to recognize some kind of sign that she was trying to tell you she was okay? Like after my mother died, every fall, every October, even when I was living in a high rise on the 41st floor, a monarch butterfly would fly all around the windows, land on the windowsill, and it happened year after year. And I had to think, this makes no sense in a metropolis like Manhattan. Makes no sense on so high up on the 41st floor. And I almost immediately recognized that it was a sign I was supposed to recognize and respond to. So tell me, did that happen to you, and did that spur your research efforts?
Yeah, I'm a little bit different because, yeah, signs were happening all around me. My wife was getting them like crazy, and I was living vicariously through her experiences. And people that I knew were getting all these communications and signs. But I was so much I was so skeptical of it, that I wasn't even recognizing the signs when they were happening because didn't fit into my frame of reference. And all these incredible things, I mean, I think I might have mentioned to you once before, but I started writing down all of these experiences that were happening, and I brought them to a statistician to calculate the odds against chance, and I had 20 million to one shots, odds above chance of greater than 1 million to 1. And I had 20 of them. And then that's the point where I just relented. And I have to tell you, it took about 5 or 6 years, for me to get to that point. Of course, after I was open to it, yeah, then I did get, many signs. The first thing that happened, Diane, is that my daughter was 15 years old when she passed. And she, I didn't know this at the time, but her best friend um, told my wife that when the two of them were 13, 2 years before, my daughter made her best friend enter into a pact with her. And the pact was that if one of them were to die, they had to each make up a sign that they were going to communicate to their friend, so their friend would know that they're still alive. I mean,
Eh,
what 13-year-olds do that, you know?
wow.
So Bailey, my daughter, her sign to her best friend that she was going to take a blue magic marker pen and leave it in an unusual place. And her best friend told my wife that she went back home after the funeral, Bailey's funeral, and then she walked into her room, and then neatly placed on her computer keyboard was a blue magic marker. And she said, I don't own one, and I don't remember ever using one. So, of course, I heard that story, but everybody else was amazed. But to me, I just dismissed it. It must be coincidence. But things
Okay,
like that happen.
I'll tell you a story. So, and I've gotten signs all my life, and even as a really little girl at like 4 years old, I was seeing ghosts and hearing them talk, and not really in a crazy way. I really never. I just kind of thought it was reality. So my mother, God bless her, passed away at 95. Her big thing in life, she loved caramel corn. So we always used to go and get caramel soaked popcorn. She adored it. And her attitude was, yeah, I know it's not good to eat, but I'm 95. What do you want? I'm going to eat what I want to eat. And she was so tiny anyway. So I had a very hard time after she passed cleaning out the apartment. It was like the final blow that she was gone, and I had a hard time facing it, but we finally did it up in Falmouth, Maine. This was when my husband was still alive. We had rented a car. We didn't own a car. We rented one. We're driving around in our Hertz car or whatever. And after cleaning up part of the apartment, we decided to go for lunch before we started driving back to Manhattan. The car was pristine. So we just had our bags in the car. That's it. Took my purse. He gets out. We go for lunch. We come back. We had a long conversation about missing her, missing my mother. The car seats and the floor of the car, there was scattered caramel corn everywhere. Yeah. And that was a real blow away moment to just know that she was saying, "Hey, I'm here and it's okay." That's at least a sense I got from it. But the I mean, I'm looking at him, he's looking at me, and I'm thinking, "No, I don't think Jim is hiding caramel corn in his pockets and throwing it in the car when I'm not looking." So
Yeah.
that's my materialization story, and that's why I believe what you're saying about the blue marker is so true.
Yeah, I mean, the theory is that our loved ones in the spirit realm, being entities of energy, can manipulate energy. It's the
Ah,
psychokinesis. It's mind over matter. They don't have a body anymore, but they still have a mind, and they can manipulate physical energy the same way, or maybe better than we can. So that's why people lots of times report recordings and anomalies with their clocks and radios and things involving energy, lights flickering on and off. You mentioned the Netflix series. We gave a clip to Netflix, which for them to use in the documentary, and it showed Fran and I walked into our home at the time, and we walked into the kitchen. And our kitchen had a ceiling with 9 hi-hat lights in it, and we were just talking about my daughter, Bailey. And as soon as I took one step into the kitchen, all 9 hi-hats. So it was like a 4th of July light show. They were going on and off, on and off, on and off. And I'm just, my wife is filming this, and I'm just standing there staring at it. And then it lasted for about 10 or 15 minutes. No other part of the house was affected, just in the kitchen. And then it stopped. And then 5 minutes later, we got a second light show. It went on for another 15 minutes. So me, as you might expect, what I did is 9 o'clock the next morning, I had an electrician there. I had him, I had him take down every hi-hat, and then I had him take apart the switches. And of course, he found absolutely nothing wrong with anything, and it had never happened before, and it never happened after that. So, things like that, you're thinking of your loved one, you mention them, you might talk to them, you might set the intention, and then as if it seems like a response, you get something like that, and there's an example of manipulating energy.
So, what are your findings or your beliefs or views on reincarnation, where you might have any number of physical bodies over a huge period of time and come and go and come and go? How do you feel about that? Did you seek proof of that? Did you hope you would meet your daughter again?
Yeah, I never gave much thought to reincarnation, and frankly, it was the hardest piece of the puzzle for me to put together. However, what I had learned is that there's a famous researcher, Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia, who for 40 years traveled around the world investigating cases of past life memories of children. And then the researcher, in effect, becomes a detective because a child starts talking about a prior family. They will interview the child. They'll get as much information as they can, and then they'll look up medical records, autopsy reports, school records, and track down families and so forth. And he documented 2,500 cases of this that were incredible. I think some of his cases are shown on the Netflix documentary. But after he passed on, uh, Jim Tucker, who's a medical doctor also at the University of Virginia, took up the mantle and sort of gave up most of his regular practice and then devoted his career to the study of reincarnation. So you can't argue, with the evidence because if you read some of these cases, they're just simply incredible. So I do believe that not everybody reincarnates. I think it's a choice. Um, but certainly it's a phenomenon that's real. And it doesn't have anything to do with religious views, or cultural views. It just, it happens. Why some people choose to come back and why some don't, I don't know. The theory is that you keep coming back until you fulfill the so-called lessons that you had to learn. I always thought it was a little bit cruel. Like you send me back to learn a lesson, but you don't tell me what that lesson is. So, so I might spend my whole life doing the same stuff that I
Could
before.
be. I feel that way sometimes. The hamster on the treadmill
Right.
experience. Now, I am going to ask you, when you have you ever deliberately tried to contact your daughter, and did you do it through a medium? Because you're talking about the fact that you actually have a medium certification program, and I want to know what your criteria are, but I want to know if you use a medium.
Yeah, all right. Well, let me. I'll address that. So, as you mentioned, in 2005, after consulting with all these researchers and scientists, we developed our own certification program for mediums because my first book, The Medium Explosion, in it I say that 85 to 90% of all the mediums that are practicing today cannot do what they claim. I'm not saying that they're fraudulent. Some are, but most are not. They just have some intuitive ability, as do we all, but not to the degree where they can communicate with the dead. Now, I personally, to answer your question, in all of these years and certifying all these mediums for so many years, I never went to one of our mediums for a reading. And the reason for that is that they all know something about me. Some of them know a lot about me. So I couldn't trust the information. so so for that reason, I did not. But However, yeah, I have intentionally tried. I would always set the intention in the first year or two after my daughter's passing for her to come to me in a dream visitation. And over the period of 3 or 4 years, and I wrote them all down in a ledger, I had 72 or 74 dream visitations over a
Whoa!
4 year period for my daughter. And I'm talking about how they differ from regular dreams is that I could talk to her, I could hug her, I could kiss her, I could smell her, as if she was standing in front of me. So that was my connection, but it took being in the various stages of sleep when my chatter mind was set
Exactly.
aside.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when you're more open and your guard is down when you're sleeping. Because for my husband who died of cancer, actually yesterday was the 27 anniversary, 27 years gone. Um, I had two, just two dream visitations. But my description of a dream visitation is it is a hyper real dream with no physical three-dimensional logic to it. In other words, and I'll tell my story very quickly. And nobody is ever going to convince me that this was not a dream visitation. Those dreams are so different and so special, and wouldn't you say so visceral? Like you said, you could hug her and kiss her and talk to her. I could not. But obviously, I had questions about how he entered the spirit world, and I had obviously leftover guilt. He had cancer. I went to extremes praying that God would take a year of my healthy life and give it to him, and that of course did not work. So in the dream, I was in the Chrysler Building, which I never worked in. I'd been there once as a tourist, but beautiful building, all gilt on the inside. That's on Madison Avenue. And outside the Chrysler Building to the right, if you're looking out to the street, is a subway station where you walk down into the subway. I dreamt I was standing there sort of confused, like, what am I doing in the Chrysler Building? Oh, do I work here? And I saw him outside because the Chrysler Building is glass and a revolving door, and that's all glass. And I thought, oh my God, he's alive. Oh my God, I've got to get to him. And as I started to walk towards that revolving door, I realized I had no shoes on or socks. I was barefoot. And I thought, no, no, now wait, this is totally illogical. This would never happen to me in the middle of Manhattan, but there I was. And as I came through the revolving door, I realized that the entire sidewalk was paved in huge chunks of broken glass. And that if I walked on this to get to him, I was going to tear my feet up and be bleeding and wounded. And I said to myself in my dream mind, is it worth it? And the answer was, oh my God, to just say one final goodbye or I love you. It's so worth it. And I started running towards him, and I could feel the blood flowing, and I could feel the pain in my feet, and it didn't matter. I wanted to say goodbye, and he went down the subway steps and disappeared into the rush hour crowd. He never talked to me, he never smiled. He was a spirit, but it was so hyper real, and that was really a profound experience.
Yeah. And after all these years, you still remember it like it was yesterday, right?
Everything. I
Yeah.
mean, I could go into total detail and take up another 30 minutes, but I'm not going to. But I've had two dream visitations from him, both of them super powerful. One of them where I wanted to give back something to him, and one when I was in a very stressful period of my life, and he came from the spirit world, very obviously, never spoke to me, but he came from the spirit world to help me and protect me. And when he had done that in the dream, he disappeared.
Hmm.
Yeah, super heavy dreams. And I don't mean heavy in a bad way. I just mean they're different. And you know when you're having that. And you had 60 or 70 of them? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah, it was really. I used to tell people like I'm useless when I'm awake, but I can communicate when I'm not awake.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you had to tell people, because I think a lot of people define their lost loved one and define themselves by the amount of their grief. Do you see that when you can convince people, scientific and medically, that consciousness goes on after the physical body fades away? Do you find that they are comforted? How much skepticism is there out there, Robert?
Well, I mean, to answer your question, not only do we see it, but researchers and scientists see it. There are several clinical studies regarding grief and a belief in an afterlife that have been published in peer-reviewed journals, and the scientists are finding a definite correlation among those who believe that their loved ones still exist in some form do better in their grief than those who don't. We see it. I mean, sometimes you can be convinced by the evidence. That was the path I took. But some people don't need the evidence; they just have this a profound after death communication or a medium reading or something that flips the way they think. Also, if a medium gives you a really good evidential reading where they're connected to your loved one, that can have an unbelievable effect. We hold 4 grief retreats per year in different parts of the United
Oh,
States, and I
how
say we,
fantastic.
Forever Family Foundation, and we have 4 certified mediums at each retreat as part of the program, and we see people that have these unquestionable evidential readings, and they leave the retreat on a high because for the first time they have hope and comfort where they had none before.
So, this is kind of a very broad question, and and I'm sure that you're going to be able to compress this into a finite answer. But what is the afterlife like? What does your daughter say, or what is the feeling you get from communicating with her? Joy? Is it scary? I mean, I'm sure it's fairly individual, but what are your experiences with what you believe the afterlife is like?
Yeah, it is a broad question. What the mediums, when you go for a medium reading, they never talk about what the afterlife is like. It's hard enough for them to get evidential communications
Yeah.
so you can identify it, let alone big narratives of what the afterlife is. However, in the past there were mediums like trance mediums that would channel spirits, and books have been written about what it's like. Also, people that have near-death experiences travel there, they tell us about what it's like. So the theory is that we go to this other realm based upon our own self judgment. In other words, there's no deity that says you go here or you go there. We have a life review where our whole life flashes before our eyes. We feel all the good that we bestowed upon others. We also feel the sadness and the hurt that we caused other people to have, and we move into the realm of like-minded people. Now for some, like the people that we recognize as being horrible people, on this earth, they may start off at a different level, but eventually, with help and guidance and review, they move on too. People talk about it's this world of thought. They talk about They talk about houses. If you want to manifest a house, you can. They talk about halls of learning and museums and colors and landscapes that are unknown to the physical realm.
Uh-huh.
And overwhelmingly, the results that people tell us, especially from near-death experiences, like 90% of them are extremely heartwarming and comforting because it's a beautiful existence to the point that they're really pissed off when they have to return. When some of them have to return, they don't want to return.
You
Why
know,
come back into a pain?
yeah, my husband had to have really radical cancer surgery several times. And one time, the last time, he died on the operating table and they brought him back to life. So he had a true near death experience, and he didn't want to talk about it because he said it was so intense that he just didn't want to relive it by discussing it. But he talked about that tunnel and that bright, blindingly bright white light. It was not comforting to him. It was scary. And the doctor said afterwards that it has something to do with adrenaline, or the doctor had a reason to say, there is no such thing as a near death experience. That's just a chemical reaction in the body. My final question is, what do you say to that?
A lot of the doctors attribute these experiences, near-death experiences, to anoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. But it's been studied, and a lot of people that have these experiences have no, lack of oxygen. And how to, and if people like test pilots that have episodes like hallucinatory episodes because of a lack of oxygen while they're in these supersonic planes, it's anything but clear and lucid. I mean, it's jumbled and they don't even know what's going on.
Yeah.
Whereas the near-death experiencers talk about the complete opposite, logical thinking, and knowledge. Also, regarding like your husband's experience, we still how we what our beliefs and our cultural views affect us. So if you're going through a tunnel, and let's say people are afraid that they're going to go to a heaven or a hell, mostly be afraid and they're religious, that may affect their experience because they're interpreting what they see in a cultural or religious framework. That's not necessarily how it is, but that's how they're interpreting it, at least initially.
So I want to say it's been a privilege, and I could ask you a billion questions, but our time is sort of up. And I want you to know all about Robert Ginsberg and the efforts he's made to bring it to an acceptable level that, yes, there is consciousness after death. And you guys out there in the audience will do yourselves a huge favor by going to Netflix and watching the hit miniseries Surviving Death, of which Robert is episode 4. Robert, thank you so much. I am hoping that for our audience, and I think almost everybody in some corner of their mind hopes that life goes on, consciousness goes on after we shed the physical body. I want to thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and we'll put up how you can find Robert. And guys, thank you so much for listening. This will air on a Thursday, as we're now doing 2 podcasts a week, one on regular subjects for women over 55 and one on extraordinary paranormal subjects. Thank you, Robert. It was
Right?
truly a privilege.
My pleasure being with you, Diane. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Too Young to Be Old podcast. The episode may be over, but the fun doesn't have to stop here. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at The Diane Gilman, or visit our website, thedianegilman.com. If you like the show, leave us a rating or a review. and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And until then, don't forget, age is just a number. Together, we'll prove that we are all too young to be old.